Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's session at the Academy. Today I'm going to be joined by Benson Garner, who is a strategy and innovation facilitator. He's joining us from Arizona, and we're going to talk a little bit about his work mostly with Intel, a company that I used to work for as well, and how he is bringing in innovation and strategy, and in particular corporate entrepreneurship, to help Intel with some of their goals that they're aiming for. So, Benson, thanks for joining us today, and if you could give yourself a quick introduction.
Sure. So as mentioned, I'm Benson Garner. I'm from Arizona, the Phoenix area, a little small suburb of Phoenix called Mesa. Born and raised there, and I haven't gone too far. But professionally, I'm an innovation and strategy facilitator. I work primarily with large enterprises, but I also do quite a bit of work with entrepreneurs and startups as well. I kind of got my beginnings in the world working on startups myself, and then went to work with an accelerator inside of an incubator at a university locally, Arizona State University, and from there began work in consulting and strategy and innovation facilitation. So I've seen a bit of things in terms of corporate entrepreneurship as well as traditional entrepreneurship, and it kind of spans the reaches of traditional startups all the way, to small to medium-sized enterprises and up to the really, really large enterprises, which is where I try to focus, but still find myself often working a lot with just traditional garage entrepreneurs.
You've also been working with Alexander Osterwalder, haven't you?
Yes.
Concerning the business model generation.
Absolutely. So I work with Alexander Osterwalder directly as part of his content team. So myself and another colleague put together interesting case studies around business models. So whether that be organizations that are currently using Alex's tools, or whether it be just cases of businesses that have really shifted their business models in a really interesting way, and we try to cover those stories and develop that into content that's helpful for other practitioners, for other consultants, for other businesses, etc. Our most recent project right now is the finalization of Alex's second book, The Value Proposition Design. There's a value proposition canvas that goes along with that, but Alex and his core writing team have just finished that up, and it's a fantastic book. I think everybody should keep their eyes out for that. It should be released by Wiley, I believe, sometime mid-October. So keep your eyes open for that. It'll be a good one.
Okay, yeah, I'll look into it. I've been using the value proposition canvas a few times. Is it the same model, or is?
It's a good question. So it dives into two building blocks on the business model canvas. It dives into the value proposition building block, which is right dead center, and then the customer segment box, which is the one on the far right. So it takes a deeper dive into the value proposition box and the customer segment box, and it takes Clay Christensen's jobs to be done approach, and tries to profile the customer in terms of the jobs they're trying to get done, the pains associated with getting those jobs done, the gains that they're seeking, and then from a value proposition perspective, it tries to identify what bundle of products and services you're providing to address those jobs, pains, and gains, and what are the specific pain relievers that are provided via those products and services, and the gain creators that are provided via those products and services.
Yeah.
So really, really powerful tool. I think it speaks to a lot more people even than the business model canvas did. It'll be really interesting to see, what types of people find it to be a valuable tool. We've got some ideas, but we'll. The proof is in the pudding, as they say. So we'll see.
Well, I actually think those two blocks are the most important blocks of the whole canvas, and these two blocks need to be in sync, right? Your value proposition very much has to match the customer segment. If your segment changes, that could have an impact on your value proposition. So as a startup or starting a new project, even, this is the first thing you need to get right and actually validate,
Right.
because then you start building the rest of the business model around it, right? And if you
Exactly.
change one little piece, it is going to affect all the other blocks.
Right. Exactly. You have to identify that product market fit first, because, for example, I mean, as you mentioned, it'll change the other blocks. So, for example, if your customer segment changes, you may require new channels to reach that customer, and those customers might require different types of customer relationships than, say, your other customers, and the revenue model might be entirely different. So, absolutely, you've got to have those two building blocks right, because that will affect all of the the other 7 building blocks of the business model canvas.
Mm. Okay, so it's a good introduction to what's coming out.
Yep.
Is it the business model canvas that brought you to Intel to work on some projects with Intel?
Yes, that was part of it. There were kind of a couple of things that caused that to happen. So I was doing some work, as I mentioned, at Arizona State University within their incubator, and I had put together a curriculum around Steve Blank's customer development methodologies, and Eric Ries's Lean Startup, and Alex Osterwalder's business model canvas, and had designed a curriculum for the startups that are going through their program. And at the time, we were leveraging a lot of mentors to help participate in this program, and to kind of not only provide mentorship to the entrepreneurs themselves, but also to kind of reinforce the curriculum that we had put together from a practical, real world angle. So at one point, we had a lady from Intel come through the accelerator as a mentor, and she saw what we were doing and the curriculum that I had put together, and said, "Hey, this is fantastic. I really love what you're doing with startups." And in not so many words, basically said, "Do you think you could teach a big old stodgy Intel to behave more like a startup does?" And I said, "I don't know, but it'd be a fantastic experiment. Let's give it a try." And she hired me and a partner at the time to come in and to deliver a training to three very specific business units that she was involved with at the not business units, new business projects that she was involved in as a result of the work that she did within that specific division. And so we put together kind of a statement of work around it, and did the traditional consulting 101 stuff, and got in there, put together a proposal, and designed this program. It was a 12-week training program directed at these 3 teams. So that was probably somewhere along the lines of 20 individuals within this group, and mainly middle managers. Mainly middle managers, but some general managers, some directors, some other important titles. But so a pretty good group of individuals at Intel that she was able to pull together and have participate in this program. So that's what kind of got it kicked off. She had come through the accelerator, saw what we were doing, thought it could be helpful and valuable to these new businesses that they were running. And it was an absolute experiment from day one.
So was it pretty much the same accelerator program, or did you have to tweak it to make it fit corporate people?
Right. So what she hired us to do was pretty much the same accelerator program. It was no, we want what you did with these startup teams, and exactly the way that you did it. The only thing that we changed a little bit was just some of the language and the way that we delivered the content. And we weren't nearly as how can I say we weren't nearly as militaristic as we were with the startup teams, because we were obviously dealing with people with a substantial amount of experience and expertise in their fields, and we obviously had quite a bit quite a greater deal of respect and tactfulness as we dealt with these individuals than we would with, say, a startup entrepreneur.
Right. I think with the entrepreneurs, you're allowed to be a bit more ruthless.
Yeah,
'Cause you
right.
But okay. So 12 weeks. How does that break down? Is it? I'm guessing it's not full time, right? For these managers, they've got their daily business that they need to attend to at the same time, right?
Right, absolutely. So these managers have products and services that they're actively managing and actively executing on. And so the three projects that were brought into this training are brand new, right? And so they're not putting 100% of their time towards any of these projects, which actually was one of the challenges that we ran into, and we can talk about that more if you'd like. But um, in fact, when we started working with our initial contact there, we simply asked her that question. Hey, tell us what the breakdown is of each of these teams, and tell us how much of their time is going to be spent dedicated to these businesses. And so she put together a spreadsheet and kind of put, this guy is maybe allocating 10% of his time to this. This guy's 25%. This lady is, this is 50% of what she does. This person, it's about 75. So she kind of broke it down that way, and realized that she only had on each of those projects about, two people when it was all said and done. Even though there was 5 or 6 people allocated to the project, in terms of time, she really only had 2 heads. If you were to look at it as if those heads were 100%.
Right. And so
So
what did that mean for the training? It became half a day a week, or?
so for the training, it was exactly that, half a day a week. Half a day a week for the training, and then outside of the actual training, they were expected to do the Steve Blank, get out of the building and go talk to customers, as well as to be continuing to work with their product development teams, their technical teams, and the folks in marketing and finance and all of the stuff that you would expect them to do. But in addition to that, they were forced to get out of the building and talk to a lot of people.
So this is great because it sounds like you've already done what the Academy is now trying to do. Our curriculum is also very aligned with Steve Blank's work and what Eric Ries has been doing with Lean Startup. It's also very much centered around developing the business model and validating the ideas that those different segments have. So what sort of results were you seeing at the end of the 12 weeks? I presume your contact person was happy with the results, and maybe you can summarize for us maybe some of the observations that were made.
Sure. So it was really interesting because at the outset there was a lot of, how is this any different from, user-centered design, or from, the work that's happening at IDEO, or the work that, there, all these comparisons that they were trying to make, and, why is this any different? And, all we could say is it's different, right? We didn't really have a great way to describe it to them other than to basically get them to just do it. So that was kind of a hurdle for us up front. And probably about week 3 is when we really started to see people's eyes opening and, some excitement about the work. And so what actually happened is some of the teams really pushed themselves to just try it and just get out of the building, as we said, and just go start talking to people. And specifically, there was one team that was really interesting. They actually went to a shopping mall and just started stopping people in the shopping mall and talked to, like 20 people. So they way exceeded the number of people we expected them to talk to. And it wasn't just 20 of the same types of people. They were talking to, moms with children, and, men who had just got off work and needed to go to the store to buy, a new suit, or they were talking to shop managers, and, they were talking to all sorts of different types of people. And the feedback that they were gathering was so contrastingly different from what their expectations were. And so the story that they brought to the training class in that next week was absolutely phenomenal, because it was exactly what you would expect from a startup, right? We had this assumption that we wanted to test, and we didn't have a really great way to test it other than to go conduct a bunch of custom, see whether or not people have this problem that we believe that they have. And so we got out of the building and we talked to these people, and here's what we learned. And they're bringing back, direct quotes from these individuals, and they're bringing back just really interesting insights that are directly related to the conversations that they had inside of this shopping mall. And then they were actually able to tie some of those insights back to some of the assumptions that they had wondered about, that they weren't sure about. Somebody in a meeting somewhere said, "Hey, have you ever thought of it this way?" And they didn't give it too much credence at the time. But when they get out and they start talking to real potential customers, or users rather, of their products and services, now those now what before was seen as just somebody being critical inside of a meeting, now is actually something to look at, right? And something to actually consider. And so that was kind of the first big breakthrough. And this team was so excited about it, and it kind of got the other teams jealous a little bit, right? Like, wait, how were they able to gain so much insight so quickly, and why can't we do the same thing? And so all of a sudden there's this competition going on between the teams of, kind of who can get the best insights and who can have the best interviews and who can, right? They're really getting excited about doing the work, and not just because it's competition, but because they're actually learning real insightful things about their business.
But so I just got to jump in there, because it sounds like this notion of gaining insight was the shocker. But this is Intel. How many marketing people do they have, right? Isn't that their job, to go to the market and understand their customers? Why is that not happening?
Well, it is happening, but it's happening in a different way, right? And the insights, as you mentioned, are different when you actually talk to a customer and when you go hire a market research firm to go run a study. Right, those are two very different things. Actually getting face to face with a potential customer or potential user, and actually being able to see their pupils dilate, as Steve Blank puts it, right? Actually being in front of them to see their body language is so much different than just hiring McKinsey or Bain or BCG to come in and do an extensive an extensive consulting project that they pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for, and get a binder at the end and some recommendations as to how to approach the market. Right? When you can actually see the customers behaving and reacting as a result of the conversations that you're having with them, that's extremely powerful, and way more powerful than a binder full of information and statistics and market sizing and segmenting and all that type of stuff. So it's not that the marketing team is not doing their job, because they are doing their job, but it's just a different job, right? It's a different type of insight that you gain, and both are very powerful in their own ways. I don't think that you can just go off of customer discovery and customer development work. I think you need that second marketing piece to add a different layer of data and insight, or data that supports the insights, the human insights that you're getting. I would probably give more credence to the human insight than to the typical marketing work that we do, but you need both. I think they go hand in hand.
Yeah, maybe it's like you rely on those research studies to understand what sort of market direction to go in, but then the customer development work is more useful when you're on the ground trying to figure out how then to actually go into that market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. Now, I mean that seems too linear to me, and creating a new business is much more art than it is process. Now, we can apply some process, absolutely, but I don't know that it necessarily always happens in that, in those lock steps like that. we start with market research, and then we start with customer development, and then I don't know that it necessarily happens that way. I think sometimes it just kind of happens, right? Um, but absolutely though, as we apply processes, and as we try to be more systematic about our approaches, yeah, we'll get better at building new businesses. But I think you're right though. The market research, the traditional market research, can give us some direction as to where to go, and I think that the data that you collect can help to support the human insights that you're gathering.
Yeah. So what else happened as a result of these face-to-face insights
Sure.
that the team was gathering?
Yep. So the given that the teams were at various stages within their projects, so some were a little bit further along than others, and some were just barely starting. Um, the level of insights were different. Some of them were just simply validating stuff that they already knew, but now they had evidence, right? And some of them were making substantial iterations and pivots along the way, um, and drastic realizations to some of the decisions that they had made early on. Like, for example, one of the teams had um, chosen to take on a significant partner in developing this new product, right? And um, the realization that they came to was, we're putting way too much stock in what the partner is telling us about the end customer. Because I mean, when you look at Intel, right, they're super high up the value chain, right? They're not directly engaging end users and end customers, right? They're working with other distributors, and sometimes they're the OEM, sometimes they're not, sometimes they're working with systems integrators, and all
Yeah.
sorts of different types of value chain partners, right? So when you look at a company like Intel, they're expecting and they're hoping that the players down the chain are doing a lot of this, marketing work, right? This customer development work, gaining these insights, and so they're making a big assumption that their partners have the right answers, right? And that was probably the biggest revelation of one of the teams was, it's good to work with partners, but we actually need to do some of this work ourselves so that we also have evidence to back up what they're telling us. And in this specific scenario, the evidence that they brought back was in direct contrast to what the partner was telling them. And upon deeper conversations with this partner, they came to find out that the partner was basically flying blindly, just like Intel was.
Mm.
And so that actually led to, if you want to talk about that, we can on another day, or maybe it's part of this interview. But that actually led to another follow-on training that this specific team did with that partner together at that partner's corporate offices. So it was a really interesting follow-on project as a result of that. But that was something that was super insightful. But I think in general, as an outcome of this whole project, right, there were 3 teams that were one day doing business as usual, and after 12 weeks, they had substantially changed the way that they approached new businesses. Now the conversations were not, hey, we need to get that market research report, ASAP. It was, hey, what are the big assumptions that you're making about your business model, about your channel partners, about your value proposition, and how can we go proactively test those things, both with real live interviews, with minimum viable products, with any number of different prototypes and experiments. And so the conversations were starting to change, and you could start to see at a very small level cultural change starting to happen within these 3 teams, which was really cool. What we did at the end of this project was pretty interesting. We had a number of upper-level managers that didn't participate through the 12 weeks, but knew it was going on and were a bit skeptical, but allowed the project to continue anyways. And so we brought those managers in at the end for a presentation from each of the 3 teams, and then they also got some directors from other from other businesses within Intel that were relevant. They brought in some strategy folks. They brought in some other people, all over the globe, kind of virtually, to see these final presentations and these report outs from these three teams that had gone through this process. And what was really interesting was those individuals who were skeptics in the beginning were all of a sudden totally converted to this way of doing things because of the amount of evidence that these teams were able to produce around these businesses. So now, instead of bringing a market research study or some numbers that were pulled together because of a study that was done externally or whatever, they're now bringing together real user stories, real customer stories, real stakeholder stories that are providing the evidence for these teams and the directions that they're taking in their businesses. So if a GM or a director decides to veto the decision that a team has made, they're deciding that in direct competition to the evidence that the team has produced. So if they're wrong, right? If they're wrong, they're basically saying we're going against all this evidence that's now been produced around the direction that we're taking in this business. And that's fine. They could be right, they could be wrong to take the direction they choose to ultimately take, but again, it's going to be in direct opposition to the evidence that's been produced.
Right. It's evidence-based decision making versus gut feeling and intuition.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, a really great outcomes, substantial learning, substantial insights from the teams, total cultural shifts and change within, at a very small level within these teams, new buy-in from upper level management, and just overall excitement about the speed, I think, that first the level of evidence, but also the amount of speed that they were able to collect that evidence within.
So the 12 weeks
so
even considered to be very... Sorry?
Say that again. I was going to say it brings a lot more meaning to that, to that adage, fail forward faster, right?
Right, and this was, as you said in the beginning, people that were only spending 10 or 15% of their time on these projects anyway. If they had been 100%, I guess the speed factor would even be greater, right?
Right. Eric Ries talks a lot about cycle times and why cycle times matter, right? The only thing I like to say, the only thing that's standing in the way of you and success is the speed with which you can propel yourself through that build, measure, learn cycle. Yes, absolutely. So if these teams had been spending 100% of their time on these projects, you can only imagine that the cycle times would have drastically improved. And each time you improve the cycle time, presumably improve the amount of insights that you're gathering in the process.
Great. Okay.
Which means you can make evidence-based decisions.
Sure, and I guess that's the name of the game at the end is making better decisions, because bad decisions cost a lot of money, right?
Right.
Okay, so this is a great example. I love the story, and I love how it came about with the Intel member of staff going through the accelerator program first. Maybe just on that, Benson, why was she in the accelerator program? Was she doing it because she knew she wanted to bring some of these expertise into the organization? Or was she actually thinking of doing her own startup and leaving Intel?
That's a really great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. I've never asked her that question. I think I'm going to call her today and ask her.
You're going to know her original motivation, right?
We were just really surprised that somebody at the enterprise level would be so interested in the work we were doing with startups. I think we had never engaged with an enterprise in that way before, and we had heard that other people had done it and were finding interesting results, but we had never done it, and so we didn't know the right questions to ask. but to be honest with you though, I think her motivation for being in the accelerator was more out of interest and kind of just kind of wanting to give back, so to speak. She had spent a lot of time at Intel doing a lot of really interesting work, and I think she just kind of felt, hey, there's these startups over here doing really interesting things, and some of them are related to, some work that I've done at Intel. If I could be a mentor and help some of these people to get farther along in these businesses than they would have otherwise, then I'm all for it, right? But I think, regardless of what her motives were, it'd be interesting to find out. I agree with you, and I should find out. But regardless of what the motives were, she saw the value, right? She immediately saw the value in applying startup methodologies to creating new businesses within an existing large enterprise.
Yeah, you're right. And sorry, I actually forgot she was a mentor and not a participant. So that makes sense that she wanted to give back for sure. Okay,
right. I should have made that more clear up front. She was a mentor. She was not working on a startup herself. She was in the program to try to coach and help other entrepreneurs.
Well, it's great that she saw the value of that process. It obviously brought her a lot closer to the actual methodologies that are happening. And then to take the initiative to bring that inside your organization is, especially when there's maybe not a lot of people backing you up at that stage, right? People are skeptical, so it's not hard. It's not difficult. It's not easy for these people to bring in new methodologies.
No, it's not at all. And you touched on a really important point. So if you were to, going back to that value proposition canvas, if you were to sketch up a value proposition canvas on who our customer was, right? This director within a pretty important division at Intel, that's responsible for a lot of really important business units and products and services below it. She's got a political game that she's got to be playing all the time, right? You know what the politics are like at Intel. You work there, right? There's constant restructuring and change, and you're always getting new titles and new so on and so forth, and she's got to protect her position at Intel. So this is a huge risk, right? I mean, if this doesn't go well, she's invested a substantial amount of not only money but time away from managers and their businesses. So if this doesn't go well, this doesn't bode well for her and for her career, right? And she's got a lot of visibility within the organization that she's got to kind of maintain and protect. So this was, I didn't realize this in the beginning, but this was actually a huge risk for her, right? And I think that's important, because anybody in kind of involved in creating new businesses inside of an enterprise, you're basically challenged with whether or not I'm choosing to commit career suicide. Because you are, right? Every single time you choose to engage in a new business, you're running up against that possibility that you're committing career suicide every single time. So unless you've been given the direct, unless you've been given a directive from the top level management or the at the executive level, you run that risk. So if you don't exist within some innovation unit inside of the organization, whether that's at Intel specifically, it's Intel Labs, it's New Business Initiatives, it's ICAP, their venture capital group. It's if you haven't been given that directive, then you run that risk of committing career suicide, which this lady specifically had not been given that directive, and so this was a huge risk for her, huge risk.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I guess people like us are relying on people like this lady to actually take that chance, just the same as an entrepreneur takes the risk to try and launch new products or work on things under the radar as well.
Sorry, my apologies. I was on mute there. I don't know if you could hear my daughter screaming in the background, but
That's
I'm
fine.
uh, um, so absolutely, and I mean it's going to be a challenge for you. It's going to be a challenge, for the academy specifically, but it's also a challenge for anybody that's looking to, uh, you know, to engage in corporate entrepreneurship, um, at any level, really. I mean, even if you're given the directive, right, you still, I mean, you're given some air cover, so to speak, right? But you still you still run the risk of being that being that individual within the organization that kind of has their head in the clouds, right? They're always looking at these pie in the sky business opportunities that really never materialize, never really amount to anything. If you look at the statistics, right, and the percentage of new businesses that actually are successful, it's so small, right? And you're kind of you're basically choosing to be that crazy person, right? that crazy person that's always looking at
Yeah.
these opportunities that are never going to amount to anything.
Yeah, but that's at the same time what gives me hope is the fact that it has been so bad in the past, 9 out of 10 ventures failing or whatever. But
Right.
now you look at what is happening in the startup world, what is happening with entrepreneurs, early stage entrepreneurs that do go through these accelerator programs. Take the Founder Institute, as the biggest example, having trained now over 1,100 entrepreneurs launching their companies, and they're experiencing an 89% success rate. So turning that failure rate on its head just because of the methodologies and the structures and the processes that are being applied. So if it can be done on the outside, I believe it can be done on the inside. There are other challenges to go through for sure, but that's what we're living for.
Yeah, absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more. And whether or not our numbers are accurate, and I doubt they are, right? Most statistics are made up on the spot, but I think the point is, and I think Steve Blank puts it well, but the point is that we don't know whether or not we can increase the success rate, because if you look at those ventures, that number, 89% success rate, right? That actually means 90% of the businesses that they're working with have made numerous iterations, numerous pivots. So to say that it's success, how do you define success, right? Is
Well,
it
yeah,
is it that
they're
we
still
killed
alive.
10
They're not
businesses
dead.
on the path to the one that was going to work? I would say that that's success. But does that really change our ratio of new ventures that fail? No, it doesn't. Right? It's still the same number of ventures that fail. We're just getting to that failure rate a lot faster, right? We're wasting, and Eric Ries, the whole point behind the lean startup is to reduce waste in the process of launching new businesses. And I think that that's exactly what these methodologies do. So whether or not we actually can increase and can claim that we're increasing the success rate, I don't know. I really don't know. But I think that we can say that we are reducing waste and we are speeding up the time that it takes to find what success is, which is probably more powerful, I think, even than increasing the success rate.
Sure, yeah, I would agree on that as well. So let's move forward because there is a happy ending to this story, I feel.
There
What
is.
is Intel doing now?
There is. So Intel, so it's really interesting because we went through this 12-week program, and the reality of it was is we didn't know how impactful it was until probably, I don't know, 6 months later, 6 months after the program had ended. We actually we basically finished the project, we were done, and we didn't hear a whole lot from them for about 6 months. And then all of a sudden we got a call, hey, we want to do this project with that key partner. Remember when we were going through that program and we had taken the key partner on, and we want to do a dual training with them. Oh, that's really cool. awesome, yeah, let's do it. It'll be, except we need to do it in a different way. So we kind of modified the curriculum and the way that we actually rolled out the training. So it's much more of just like a couple of day workshop than a a long-term engagement. But beyond that, there were two or three other projects that took place, all kind of rapid fire, one right after another, inside of Intel as a result of that project we did. So we got hired by the team up in Portland, the new business initiatives team up in Portland, who was working on a project, and they also had somebody else who wanted to kind of piggyback on their training from the automotive group in Chandler, and then the strategy office within the group that we were working within decided that they needed to do a project as well to define their end-to-end strategy for the entire group. And so there was a number of projects that kind of all happened one right after another about 6 months later. But what was more interesting than that was those skeptics that we brought in for that final presentation are now using the language of the training. So now when their employees come to them and say, hey, we've got this new idea, this new business that we want to explore, and this is how we believe we're going to go to market with it, now the GM is saying, well, is that an assumption or is that a fact? And then they say, oh, well, I guess that is an assumption. And then he says, well, how could you run an experiment to produce some evidence and to validate that assumption? And so they kind of go back to the drawing board, and then they go run an experiment. And so that's really cool, because we've now got a GM who didn't even go through the training, but saw the value enough that he's now basically asking all of his employees to come to him with new ideas that have been validated through this method. So they're now being asked to produce evidence. Beyond that, we've got a couple of folks that went through the training that have now replicated the training in a very Intel-specific way, who've now come back and asked for us to guide them in producing, how can I say this, a more well-defined Intel-specific training program. So they've now asked us to basically come back as consultants to guide them in creating what that formalized program and process looks like specifically for Intel. So now we're being asked to kind of break into business as usual, right, and start defining processes that work within their existing within their existing way of doing things.
Right,
so,
and
I think in more specific terms, right? How do we kind of hijack the traditional stage gate process that they're involved in, and start inserting requirements within those stage gates?
Okay, so designing parts of your curriculum and methodology into their existing work processes.
Right, into their existing workflow. That's exactly.
Okay, that's really cool, and I know that Intel now have a new directive, right? They are focusing on achieving a 25% year-on-year growth rate. Is that right? And they believe that a lot of these processes could be helpful.
Right. So, so the specific group that I was working with, and I'm not going to give more than just that, just because of confidentiality, and that wouldn't be a breach of that confidentiality. But that's right. The specific group that I've had the privilege of working with has basically been given the directive of achieving 25% CAGR over the next 3 to 5 years, because the executives and the board feel like this specific group has the potential to do that. Now, how they actually go about achieving that, they don't know, right? they don't know how to get there, but they've given this directive to the VPs of this group and the GMs of this group and the directors, and said, get there. And the GMs and the directors and VPs have the seen the value of the training that was rolled out within this group, and they said, is it possible that these methodologies could help us to get there, right? And so more specifically, the team that I was working with, the GM that I worked directly below, and the director that I worked directly with, are the ones that are engaging me for that, standardized approach for Intel specifically. They're the ones that are kind of driving this initiative and trying to create the buy-in at the upper levels of the organization so that they can actually standardize some of these things, so that they can actually make it a line item in the budget, so that they allocate resources to these trainings and to these methods and to these processes, because they really do believe that doing business this way will help them to maybe, like I said, maybe not achieve a higher success rate, but find what success is sooner, which means that they realize revenues and profits much sooner, they reduce risk in the process of getting there, they allocate resources more efficiently, all in the process of realizing these new businesses and realizing these new directives of 25% CAGR over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So and that's another thing that usually happens, right, inside of a big enterprise is sorry, this is a side note, but whenever somebody gives a directive like that, grow at 25% CAGR, it's usually with this caveat that, oh, and by the way, we can't increase your budget, so figure it out, right?
Right.
So you can see why from an efficiency standpoint, they would adopt a methodology like this, because it helps them to gain the insights that they need much sooner and make those critical decisions much sooner, which presumably, as we've mentioned, gets them to revenue and to profits for these new businesses and for these new markets in a much quicker way.
Yeah, Benson, I think this example is really interesting because we're not actually just talking about selected entrepreneurs here. We're talking about embedding these entrepreneurial methodologies into processes, right? Existing processes for everyone to use, right? This is across different kinds of departments, whether you're marketing or sales or development, the same rules kind of apply, and the aim at the end of the day is really increasing efficiency. Is that the right way to view it?
Yeah, absolutely, and we saw some of that taking place at Intel, and I've seen that in a number of other projects that I've worked on with other large enterprises. What typically happens is you get these crazy corporate entrepreneurs, right, who want to do this and who might even stand on their soapboxes and preach it to the groups. But whenever you can produce results like we were able to produce at Intel, people take notice, right? And it doesn't matter at that point what function of the organization that you're in, whether it be marketing or finance or strategy. You start to see value, and you wonder if you could replicate some of that value within your specific business function. So specifically, we saw the finance team say, basically, what if when somebody comes to pitch for funding, right? When they come to pitch for funding, they're required to bring and to produce the evidence, their customer development work. They've got to produce that in order for us to say yes or no, right? And if they can't produce the evidence, then it's almost automatically a no. But if they can produce the evidence, then we're much more willing to listen to their pitch, and much more willing to maybe allocate the funding so that they can explore this new business idea. So that's one really interesting example of where now you've got the finance team, in which at Intel, finance is kind of totally separate from the rest of the organization in efforts for an appropriate checks and balances to be in place. And so it's really interesting for a group like finance, who has a totally separate objective than to produce, to produce revenues per se, right? Saying, oh wow, this could be a way that we could start more appropriately allocating funds to specific projects and initiatives. Um, another very specific example was they leveraged their sales teams in really interesting ways to get some of these customer insights as well. So rather than what typically happens is the sales team is out there, they're in the field all the time, and then they come back to engineering and say, we need these specifications to be built into the product, and then engineering goes back and kind of puts together a plan of how they would go about doing that, and they figure out how much resources are going to be required, and blah blah blah, and maybe eventually you deliver a new feature or a new product, but it's usually specific to like one or two customers, because the sales team, they've got a different objective, right, to make a sale. But now what we saw happening was that these customer development teams, rather than just believing the sales force, they required that the sales teams allow them to come on sales calls with them, and and so they started then inserting their interview questions into these sales pitches and into these sales conversations with the sales teams, and the sales teams got really interested in what was going on and why they were doing what they were doing. So not only did they kind of disrupt current processes within the organization, but they've now got the sales teams that are also kind of interested in oh wow, how could we produce more interesting insights for these new business units, and for these managers and these directors. So that was just another really specific, really interesting way that Intel, in a different, across functions is realizing value from this, and is changing the way that they work and do business.
Yeah, it's definitely cool to see how it's spreading across, and I think that's really important for people to take note of. At the end of the day, we're talking about innovation, and I think the key message again is that innovation can happen anywhere, right? And these methods are really behind that, helping to minimize waste and increase efficiency.
Right. I mean, it's one of the core tenets of Lean Startup, right? Eric Ries is constantly saying entrepreneurs are everywhere. And I think what's more interesting to me is that not only are entrepreneurs everywhere, but an entrepreneur doesn't always know that they're an entrepreneur until they see that they are, right? And until they see that they can be, which is a big challenge inside of an existing organization that's set up to execute on a known business model, right? How can you be both an entrepreneur, somebody searching for a business model that doesn't exist yet, and an executor, somebody that's executing on a business model that's currently known? And I think you can do both, and we've seen that you can do both. Now, does it require a different set of talents and skills? Absolutely. Do those talents and skills need to be developed? Absolutely. Can we help people develop those talents and skills? Absolutely, I think we can. Are they different types of people that are better at entrepreneurship than at searching for business models than executing known business models? Sure. Right? Some people are going to be naturally better fits for corporate entrepreneurship than for executing the business as it exists today, and that's okay, right? But I think what's important is that we start identifying who those entrepreneurs are. Who are the people that have the skills? Who are the people that could develop the skills? And let's put them to work at searching for new, innovative businesses that could potentially, drastically improve, the businesses as it exists today, or entirely disrupt the businesses that exist today, and create new value for new markets, for new people, for all across the globe. And I think at the end of the day, that's what innovation and entrepreneurship is all about, right? Creating new value for new customers, and basically creating insurmountable wealth for not just one or two individuals, but for the entire world. If you look at some of these really interesting social enterprises that are out there doing a lot of cool work in third worlds with things like solar and water treatment, and how can we be more effective at food production, and all these types of things that creates value and wealth for people in ways that we wouldn't have been able to do before without entrepreneurship and innovation. And I think that at the end of the day, that's what it's about, is creating that value, creating that wealth for people who wouldn't have been able to realize it before.
Yeah, very good. I completely agree, and definitely in line with what the Academy is trying to achieve. So Benson, great. I feel like we could talk for hours, but most of our viewers are probably watching this in their lunch break or on their way home. So I think we need to end it there. But I want to thank you very much for joining us today, giving us those insights to Intel and sharing some key lessons with our audience. If it's okay with you, we'll have your email address up at the end of the video. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, they can.
Absolutely.
Great, then let's do that, and thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.